everyone talks about how van life is better for the planet than living in a house. But is it really? Ultimately, we still use a lot of fuel and other resources, so I thought I'd take today's video to compare the two and see if we can come up with a good answer. So when I was researching this, I was looking more at stats and figures. So I was looking at, because I'm a numbers girl, so if you give me the stats and then I can compare the figures and go, yes, definitively this is the answer. But it's just not the case when you're looking at a situation like this. So, you know, and I kind of think about science and I think the variables that they have to include, and this is why with, you know, scientific research, it can take so long because you do have to try, you know, you do have to consider different variables. So when I say that, I mean if, for example, you're living in a house and you live in a hotter climate where it's extremely hot all the time, so you might be running your aircon all the time. If you're in a cooler climate, you might be running heating all the time. If you're living in a house but you're also driving 20,000 kilometres a year, you know, versus living in a van and you're still driving those kilometres, then living in a van would probably be more sustainable. So it's going to depend on a lot of different things when you're trying to come up with an answer. And I have to admit, like on this channel, I really try to come at you with more thoughts and information rather than saying definitively this is the answer to something, because we're all different. You know, something that's going to be the answer for someone might not be the answer for someone else. There's obviously things that I'm going to miss and I'm not going to think about. I don't know everything. So I have to admit, I tend to shy away from people that do come at me on the internet with this is the answer to this, you know, this is the definitive reason why this is happening. This is more about opening up the discussion, and I'm so open to anyone please commenting your thoughts on this video. There's going to be things I haven't thought about, but as always we comment with love and light in the effort to try and educate rather than pointing the finger and saying I know this and, you know, this is the definitive answer to that. So that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to look at different scenarios, we're going to compare, we're going to try and have a think about, you know, the different things we're using in van life versus what we're using in a home. So let's first look at a house and what sort of things you would use in a home that would increase your carbon footprint on the planet. So in a house, you've obviously got bigger rooms. So you might have a bigger house because you've got a bigger family. You might be heating and cooling rooms that might not necessarily be getting used at that time. You might be moving around the house, so it might be using more, you know, excess in power, trying to heat and cool different rooms. The water usage in a home, so obviously when you have access to endless running water, you have longer showers, you might fill the sink up more than you would in a van. You might be using a lot of water on a garden. So I know in Australia we have a lot of lawns, so we've got these beautiful big green lawns, but to try and keep them healthy it requires a lot of water. So it's kind of, I really wish a lot of houses in Australia would do more native gardens because it would use a lot less water. But I understand, you know, if you've got a family, it's good to have a nice big lawn so that you can have barbecues and play cricket and hang your heels, hoist washing lines. So you've got those sort of things that you wouldn't normally have in van life you're using in a home. So I think the water usage would be a lot more, because when you're given that convenience of having continual running water, you do just tend to use more. Electricity to run all your items. So if you're in a home, you would generally have a bigger fridge. So you're running a bigger fridge all day long, which would take more power. You're using washing machines. Now I will sort of caveat this and say that when I was in a home, I never used a dryer ever. I would always hang my clothing outside, but living in a van, I'm using a dryer all the time at the laundromat. So I do use more power when it comes to laundry. And yeah, so there's just a lot more power usage because you're just running things like a big hot water system. If you're using an electric hot water system, you might be running a big oven. You know, so there's obviously a lot more power you're using. And once again, because that power is at your fingertips and it's not, you don't have to manage that power. So in van life, you know, you've only got a certain power storage in your battery. So depending on your battery size, so yeah, that there would be a lot more electrical use. But once again, you might have a house that has solar panels. So you might actually be giving back to the grid. If you've got enough solar panels and enough battery storage that you've got excess power, you might be giving back to the grid. So, you know, you might be, negligible in your power usage. The other thing to think about, what have we got? We've got the water, the electricity. Food is food, no matter where you are, you're going to eat probably about the same amount of food. Transport. So if you are in a home, it's, you know, a lot of Australians still use their own transport. And, you know, even if you're using public transport, that is still, you know, you still got a carbon footprint with that. It's obviously a lot less than having a car. So if you have a car, it's not just the fuel, you've got tyres. And I actually heard, I think it was on a podcast, that the brake pads from your vehicle actually create a lot of, you know, environmental rubbish in the air. I don't know how to put that. So the brake pad dust is actually quite bad for the environment, is probably a better way of putting that. So there's a lot of things with vehicles, you know, and it might depend on the size of your vehicle as well, whether you're running a petrol or a diesel. And I will talk further more on petrol versus diesel as well a bit later in the video. So, you know, I think even if you're in a home, quite typically people will use their vehicle and drive about 10 to 20,000 k's a year. So that's probably a lot of things with what you would use in a home. But there's also the fact that when you build a home, you're using a lot of resources. So depending on that size home, so you might be living in a block of flats or apartments that you're using less land space, so you've had to clear less land. You know, you're obviously sharing that, you know, a lot of the utilities and the spaces in that building, and you're living in a smaller area. So, you know, you're all sharing one roof. So, you know, it's going to depend whether you've got that sort of lifestyle or you're living in a home that's just for you and your family on a specific bit of land. Now, when you're building a home, you're using different materials, so, you know, you might have to mine for those materials, you might have to cut down trees to get the wood that you need to build certain things in that home. There's all the furniture that you need to purchase to fill that home. So that's obviously using a lot of resources as well. And even like, it's not just about sourcing those resources, but it's also the energy it takes to build those resources. So if you are making a house out of bricks, what is the energy used to create those bricks? So not only are you taking that clay or whatever it is that you're building those bricks with, but, you know, I think they have to go in a kiln or something, so they've got to be heated. I don't know how bricks are made, but I'm using an example here. So there's a lot of, you know, resources and environmental impact on just building a house. And it is also impacting our wildlife as well. So it's obviously impacting, you know, if we're cutting down their habitat, you know, so we might be reducing habitat for wildlife and in turn reducing the amount of wildlife. So, but then you might, once you've built the home, you may build, you know, you might landscape your home so that it's more environmentally friendly. So you might be having large trees that are covering your home and shading it more from the sun. You might be growing those large trees for wildlife so you can attract more wildlife, you know. So there's a lot of variables there, and I hope I've thrown a lot of different things at you to think about. And obviously, like I said, please comment below things I haven't thought about or said. There are little things that I do as well to try and reduce my impact in things that I purchase and that I use, and I'll go through those too later in the video. So now let's look at van life as a comparison, and I'm probably going to use my setup as a comparison mainly because that's the experience that I have. So let's talk utilities to start with. So obviously with water, you manage your water a lot more in van life because you're only carrying a certain amount of water. It's finite. We don't have this endless amount of water that we can rely upon and source all the time. So you are a lot more conscious about how much water you use. So if you have a shower, or like bathe yourself, so sometimes I might just do a bushman's bath, which, you know, for those of you that don't know, it's just having a bucket and some water in that bucket and you basically work your way down. So it's a very small amount of water that you're going to use to achieve the same result. Otherwise, I might just, after I've come out of the ocean, just use a water bottle and just squeeze fresh water over myself to rinse the salt water off. So. And then you've got dishes, so obviously with dishes, and I use a sink still and put water in there with suds, and I know a lot of you are trying to encourage me to use a water bottle with vinegar in it, and you would just spray down the plates and then you wipe them off with a paper towel. I have sort of chosen not to do that, only because I think I would use a lot more paper towels in that scenario, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the way everyone's been suggesting. And so I'm kind of the thought that water is a renewable resource. It's something that's going to keep coming down from the sky, hopefully, forever. Whereas paper towels, there's a lot of energy that needs to be used to create those paper towels. And it's creating, you know, it will just go away into the earth. You know, it's not something that's going to hang around for hundreds of years. But I still think it's better to try and avoid consuming things like that and creating waste. So that's why I tend to go more for the sink of water rather than the spray bottle with the vinegar. But either way, you're still using a hell of a lot less water than you would in a home. Yes, when I do my laundry, as I said, I'm still using a laundromat, so I'm still using a washing machine. However, if I just have, you know, a small few items that I need to wash, I might just use a small amount in a bucket and hand wash them with some Sard soap. So yeah, I think, you know, when it comes to water usage, obviously van life would be a lot more sustainable and less impact on the planet. Electricity, so obviously it's the same thing. Our electricity is finite. So I have a solar panel and I can also charge up my batteries from my when I run the vehicle. So I do have a 200 amp hour battery. So if you've got a larger battery, then you're going to be able to store more power. Obviously in making those batteries, you know, if you're having a lithium battery, that lithium's got to be mined. However, I think, you know, that would still last a long time, and, you know, you might have a house, if you've got solar panels on your house, you still have to have those batteries to store that power. So ultimately, I'm not sure if there's actually a completely green power source that we can all use, but it's all about trying to do the right thing. So with the battery storage and the electricity that I use, I'm managing that a lot more as well. So I won't run things excessively. I'm really managing that power. So I only have my inverter switched on, which is drawing all that 240 power when I absolutely need to. So, you know, and the way I cook, so I've chosen to use appliances that draw less power because my inverter can only draw a certain amount of wattage through it. So yeah, the appliances that I've got use less power than you would probably have in a house. I don't have an oven, you know, those sorts of things. So yes, I think the electricity usage would be less impact on the planet for van life. When it comes to the building of the van, so obviously you're still using resources in building a van. So it's obviously a smaller space though. So one thing I didn't talk about, was the heating and the cooling. So when you've got a smaller space, it takes a lot less to heat and cool it. But also in van life too, like I do complain about the cold, but I follow the weather. So I go for good weather. So therefore I don't really need to heat and cool my van. So there's a bit saved there, and look, it's going to depend on what sort of van life that you live. So you may not live that life, and you may have heating and cooling in your van, but once again I think it would be a lot less than in a house because it's such a smaller space. And to be honest, just having people inside your van can create warmth, you know, on its own. But the biggest impact on the environment is the petrol usage. So, or the fuel, I should say, depending on what you're using, whether it's unleaded petrol or diesel. So with van life, once again, this is going to depend on whether you're living a slow van life or you're travelling quite fast around Australia. And like I said, most people who live in a house still drive a car. So you might find that if you're comparing it to someone who lives in a home and they drive the same distance as you every year, then van life is going to win out, I think, because of all the other resources that you're using a lot less of. Now, petrol and diesel, I've sort of been researching this a lot lately, and please, once again, anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've found, so unleaded petrol is cleaner for health reasons. So if you're driving an unleaded petrol vehicle around the cities versus a diesel, it's going to keep the air cleaner for everybody. Diesel, I think the way I look at it is like diesel's like it's a dirtier fuel, so it's heavier, it sits in the environment more. But because of that, diesel it's more economical, so you get much more per litre out of diesel than you do unleaded petrol. So you're using less of the diesel to get somewhere. That's my understanding of it. So ultimately, it's actually less CO2 emissions into the planet than a petrol vehicle. And then I thought about that a bit more, and I thought, well, if you are driving more country rather than in a city, then it might be more beneficial again to have the diesel, because it's not going to affect the health of people around you so much either. If you've got more space and more fresh air to deal with that emission, it might be better. Once again, I'm not a scientist, it's just me having a Christy thought. So I think it's probably debatable on who wins out when it comes to the fuel usage for van life versus house, and it's really going to depend on the variables on how you live your life. And I was going to say earlier, when I was talking about the size of the van and the heating and the cooling, that obviously it takes a lot less resources to build the van versus building a full house. We're not clearing land to build it. We are using resources, like I said, that it's a lot less resources to build this van. However, obviously a house that moves uses tyres, but then if you've got a car that you drive anyway, then you've still got tyres. The only thing really is that a house that moves uses roads, so we are still clearing land for roads. We do still have to maintain those roads, so that takes power and that takes resources. But once again, if you live in a house and you have a car, you're still using all those anyway. And it's kind of why I have chosen not to be four-wheel drive and go on roads or go on tracks that aren't really roads, because I'm trying to reduce my impact. And once again, I don't say these things to call out anybody else. Everyone can live their life the way they choose. It's just me personally. I just choose to live that way because I feel like I'm not impacting the earth as much by not going on four-wheel drive tracks. In saying that, I've never driven four-wheel drive tracks, so maybe it's fine. But I just figure, I'll just stick to roads because I feel like I'm reducing my impact in that way. Now, I hate using paper towels, but in van life, you just need them because things get dirty and sometimes a cloth just is not going to cut it, or like I spill water all the time and then anyway, I could use a tea towel, I suppose. But there's just certain things you do need paper towels for. So I go the iCare brand because it's made from 100% recycled paper, like office paper. Other options you can do is bamboo, because bamboo it's more of a renewable resource because it just grows so much faster than other trees, pine trees and things like that. So, and it's kind of grows like a weed, like it is a weed. So bamboo is a better option where you can. But yeah, I think the iCare brand, and these are actually super absorbent, and you can get the double thick, like it's double length. So I don't have to buy as many of them all the time. So I love those. I do get the Earth brand for the to do my dishes with. I've always gone Earth brand. I think you can get that in a floor cleaner and things as well. And look, I don't know much about chemicals and things. I'm sure there's probably still stuff in it that's not great, but we're trying to do the best we can. Now, wipes. Wipes are another thing that I feel like I could probably, if I really tried, completely do away with. But in van life, there's just dirty things that you want to clean up, and you just don't want it on a cloth that you're going to reuse again later, even if it's for the same purpose. Like, you know, it's just the way it is. So I've just been someone who's never used wipes my whole life until van life. So, and I have to admit, when I'm picking up rubbish everywhere, the biggest thing I'm always picking up is wipes. So it does drive me insane. And I'm sure those wipes, like, I don't like to think people are just throwing them away. I'm sure the wind must catch them. Anyway, if we do have to get wipes, which in van life you do, give me another solution, I'll quite happily take it. But these ones here from Ajax are biodegradable. So if we can use ones that at least are going to be biodegradable and go back to the earth, I think they are made from bamboo, then it's a better option. Like, if you can just, when you're out shopping, just have a look at different options. And I know sometimes, you know, it can be more expensive to go, you know, the more environmentally friendly option, but I don't know, for me that it's worth it to try and protect our environment a bit more. In saying that, that Earth brand is really cheap. It's really cheap. So yeah, that's some of the little things I do. Oh, and the other thing I did was buy that water filter in my van that I've got, because I was using, I don't like to drink tap water, and I used to get, you know, like the, not Never Fail, because they are terrible. It should be called Always Fail, because they always stuffed up my order. But I used to use another brand that would bring the spring water, because I don't want chlorine in my water and that sort of thing. So anyway, when I moved into the van, I was using those plastic containers of spring water all the time, and I hated it because it's so much waste, all that plastic container. So I bought the water filter, which I just feel so much better about. I do need to replace the filters in it, you know, the fluoride one every 4 months, and the carbon filters once a year. But that's a lot less than, you know, all that plastic I was going through with the other ones. So yeah, that's some of the things I've done to try and help save the planet a bit more. So in summary, is van life better for the planet than living in a house? It depends. You know, it depends if you live in a big house. Do you live in a small house? Do you still have a car? How many Ks do you drive a year in that car? Do you live in a van? Do you live in a caravan with a car? Do you live out of a car? Do you drive 20,000 Ks a year? Do you drive 60,000 Ks a year? It depends on how you're living and what you're comparing it to. I think that, you know, because if you're just looking at a standard home, a standard Australian home, and you still have a car and you're driving 20,000 Ks a year, versus living in a van like this in my lifestyle and you're driving 20,000 Ks a year, although I have done more than that in the past, then van life would probably be more sustainable, because you know, there's that, when you're in a house, it's that invisibility of the amount of resources you're using every day. You know, you can't really see that impact, whereas in the van, you're seeing that impact every day, because, you know, you've really got to manage all those resources. And I think some of you know that Jane Goodall was, you know, she was my idol. I really valued her thoughts on the planet, and she used to say that every single person can make an impact. And it's so true. Like, it's in the small things we do every day. You know, if we can make better choices, no matter the size of them, just each day, and be more conscious of what we're doing, you know, I think that it adds up and it makes a difference. And look, ultimately, I do want to say that just by being born, we're affecting this planet. There is no way that we can live a 100% sustainable lifestyle that does not impact the planet. You know, animals impact the planet. You know, it's about balance and trying to do the right thing where we can. You know, if we think about wildlife, so there's certain animals that once their population starts to grow too much, they have a huge impact on the environment, or they might be in an environment where they're not supposed to be. So, you know, there's people that have brought in animals to Australia that shouldn't be here. And so it's having a negative impact on our environment here. But when the population of different sorts of animals reaches a certain point, it's going to impact the environment in a negative way. and it's the same with humans. You know, I've always been a big believer that population growth is probably one of the biggest effects on our planet. And I do kind of feel that that's, you know, it's kind of changing a bit now. We went through the baby boomer period, and I think maybe now young people are starting to realise that, you know, it's not necessarily just about having children and creating a family. That, you know, there's some people out there now that know that they don't have to do that. It's not the only path for them, you know, that they can live another life. So I do feel that maybe the population growth might start to decline a little bit, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that, you know, everything in moderation, including birth rates. So yeah, I think just by fact of being, you are going to have an impact. It's about trying to reduce that impact. So I hope this video has been helpful. I'm sorry that I can't give you a very definitive answer, but I don't really feel it's my place to, you know, without proper education, to tell you definitively that one is better than the other, but there's some things that I hope I've given you to consider. Many happy travels.
Cars to fix, bills to pay, rooms to clean, meals to make. What a life that we've designed. I'd do it 1,000,000 times with you and never get tired. You're my piece of heaven on earth. Oh, you make it all worth it. You're the reason I keep hitting snooze just to stay next to you, over and over and over again, over and over again. Grocery aisle hand in hand, little world but so grand. Picking up the bread and wine like we've done 1,000,000 times before, and I never get tired, 'cause you're my piece of heaven on earth. Oh, you make it all worth it. You're the reason I keep hitting snooze just to stay